Welcome, everybody. I am thrilled to have an extraordinary panel of experts for you today as we tackle the topic of nutrition. It is perhaps among the most ironic of situations that we tackle in human health, that this thing that we all do 3, 5, 10 times a day is perhaps the least understood thing in human health. And so I'm excited to bring this panel of experts to you today. My hope is that we completely blow up your current paradigm of understanding nutrition and your relationship to that food. Obviously out there in the world, there's so much conflict over, should you eat carbohydrates? Should you eat fat? Should you eat protein? And this chronic battle of the macronutrient, viewpoints on nutrition is something I really want to dismantle. And so we've pulled together this extraordinary panel of people for you to help, I think, expand your understanding, expand your viewpoint on what it actually means to be engaged in a nutritional environment. And the last 10 years, I think, has done a phenomenal job in the science realm of starting to really disorient our old model of there's human cells that need to be fed nutrients. The new model is of that ecosystem. We are an element within a complex ecosystem. As humans, we interact with our air, water, and soil systems through our food more than anything else, perhaps. And so to start to understand our food as a system by which we integrate ourselves into a diverse Mother Nature for optimal health is an exciting new era that is really destroying, decades, if not centuries, of belief systems about food. When you have a revolution of this scale, of this level of disruption, it takes time for adoption. It takes time for the public, and let alone scientists, to start to wrap their heads around the new questions, to find the new answers. And we're on that exciting new journey of new answers being revealed to the new questions. And this panel has been really pushing that paradigm across a lot of areas of expertise. Rather than take the time to read everybody's bio, which would take up the full 90 minutes, because that's the depth of the field that you have sitting in front of you, I'm going to have each of them give a quick description of their journey professionally into this nutrition world and how they've come to touch on this subject in their lives as we introduce questions to each of them. So you'll get to know each of them over the course of it. But I want to start by a quick understanding or recognition that we are a small element as human cells within this ecosystem of what we call a human body. And so to set the concept here, I want you all to understand that the human body has somewhere between 50 trillion and 70 trillion cells, depending on which estimates you're looking at. And 50 trillion cells sounds like a massive number, because indeed it is. It's a very trippy number to imagine that 1,000 million is a billion and 1,000 billion is a trillion. You start to get into these numbers and it's just a daunting number of human cells. But then to find out that they are logarithmically outnumbered by the bacteria, we don't even know, by the fungi, the viruses, and the like, how large those numbers get. But then within each cell, the mitochondria, which are these tiny little bacteria that were absorbed into multicellular life some multi-billion years in the past. And so the mitochondria are a direct extension of the microbiome. And that's a huge, misunderstanding and misperception, are just, not even a lack of awareness on the side of the scientists and doctors as much as it is in the public. And so I want you to know that your mitochondria that are responsible for taking all of the food that you eat and turning them into energy in the forms that you can utilize them as a human is all microbial. It's all part of this microbiome ecosystem. The microbiome outside of your cells are bacteria, fungi, yeast, and viruses and the like. And then within the cell, these mitochondria. And all of your mitochondria, interestingly, are inherited by your mother. You inherit none from your father. It was a very special virus that was integrated into the genome that would allow mammals to emerge. And in the emergence of mammals, 3 viruses were critical. The genes that they updated our capacity with was the ability to make a placenta, the ability for the sperm to drop the mitochondria before infusing the egg with its mitochondria, and then another one that allows for pluripotent stem cells. So those 3 upgrades from viruses were what allow us to be mammals largely in these regenerative multicellular organisms, enabled by the viruses on the genetic side. But then what it allows us to do is be in this dynamic, mammal type live birth experience where the microbiome is always part of our life cycle. And so the microbiome, both outside the cell and inside the cell, is what's responsible for turning the biophotonic energy that the sun and the soil systems will turn into plant energy back into that same solar energy at the cell level. Because you need to now break down the corn and the beets and the sweet potatoes and everything you're eating. You've got to release the biophotonic energy in that before it can do the work that it's going to do to produce a regenerative phenomenon in your body. And so I want you to start to expand that mind out, expand your mindset away from carbohydrates and proteins and fats, and start to think of biophotonics on a large level. Energy of the sun turning into plants that may go to feed animals or humans. And then we have to liberate that biophotonic energy for this experience. And in the process, we can start to imagine eating beyond the calorie. Calories is a very old and broken way of considering the potential value of food to your body. The calorie as a unit of measure is the amount of heat that it takes to increase the temperature of 1 cubic centimeter of water by 1 degree Celsius. And so that temperature change, the energy used for it, is how we've measured food for a long time. This is broken on so many levels. It's irrelevant on so many levels. But one of the major ways I can demonstrate this is through the mitochondria itself. The mitochondria does not create heat energy from the food you eat, the glucose and the fat, for the vast majority of energy use that is put into play. To create heat, it actually has to uncouple the enzymes at the end of the mitochondrial pathway that produce ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, which is one of the main, it's like the foot on the accelerator of your cell metabolism and everything else. So to produce heat, you have to actually uncouple the function of producing fuel to create thermal energy instead of the fuel that would go to promote muscle health, neurologic health, and function and beyond. And so the fact that we use a heat measurement of the value of your food is really looking at a very, very naive and perhaps minimalistic version of what those nutrients are really supposed to do for your body. And so I want you to start to realize that even our units of measure are incorrect, but then we need to go beyond that to start to think about what does it actually mean to feed a body when we start to realize that maybe 1% of those cells that'll be receiving that nutrient or that nutrient mix is actually human. The majority of food is being absorbed and processed by the microbiome within your gut, and then they're going on to feed the mitochondria inside your cells. So you're multiple times divorced from the food that you consume. So along these lines, I am excited to bring this panel to you, and I'm going to turn that really over to their next expertise, all this expertise for this next hour as we dive in, because I think you're going to get this unique perspective from each of them as we move. The first will be Dr. Gemma Newman. Dr. Gemma Newman out of the UK, a great friend and colleague, and known throughout Europe and the world now for her leadership in plant-based medicine. And she's written some phenomenal materials and books, and is just a great educator, has some incredible podcasts out there for this topic. Gemma, take us into your journey into understanding nutrition on a broader level than the calories that you and I learned in medical school.
Right. Well, I will do that. It's absolutely a real pleasure to be here with you all. And you know what, Zach, I feel like I could listen to you talk all day, but it's my turn, so I will just tell you a little bit about me. So as Zach said, I am a doctor of medicine here in the UK. I've been a doctor for about nearly 17 years now, and my absolute passion is getting to know my patients and helping them on their journey to wellness. And that's what I do every day in my clinic, and that's what I've been doing with my advocacy through nutrition and holistic health in general, because of course our nutrition is vitally important, but so is the thoughts that we have, the sleep that we get, the company that we keep, the amount that we move our bodies. All these things play a really important part in our overall health, but in my own personal experience, it's often what we put on our plate that can really give us some of the fastest transformations as we move through creating these healthier lifestyles for ourselves. And that's been part of my journey as well, in understanding all of this and in going through the literature. And I absolutely love what Zach just said about microbiome health, and how a calorie is actually not necessarily the most practical way of understanding the real nutrition that we're getting. I love the way he just described it as a heat measurement of the value of your food. That doesn't tell us very much about what we're actually taking in terms of phytonutrients, antioxidants, and all the incredible compounds that we get from plants that act synergistically with each other and with your body and with your microbiome to create this incredibly healthy environment. So yes, I think it's fascinating the way that we're learning more about microbial health, and the understanding that, as I'm sure you all know, Zach has talked extensively about how incredible the microbiome is, how there are more different kinds of bugs within us than there are stars in our galaxy. If you just think about that for a moment, how awe-inspiring that really is. And of course, how the foods that we eat are also there to feed and nourish these incredible microbes that help us to create hormones, that help us to digest, have a functioning immune system, have a functioning gut-brain axis, gut-skin axis. We're only just beginning to scratch the surface of how all these things are interconnected, and of course connected with the wider environment as well. And I think, as we're entering into this sixth mass extinction, it's become even more apparent to those of us who think holistically that as humans, we're very much part of a larger whole, and as humans, we're very much part of a microscopic whole as well. And if we look at the macro level, it's almost reflected in the micro with regard to how we are really sort of abusing our microbial health in the modern world. It's not our fault. We don't know what to do differently, but if I may, I think what I'll do now is just spend a few minutes just explaining some of the practical things that we can do to guard our microbial health, and thereby also guard our mitochondrial health and our overall health in our body, which I think will be really helpful on a practical level, so that we can think, okay, what am I going to do tomorrow to make a shift, to make a change, to help my body and to help the planet as well. So why is it so important? Well, we know that with the overuse of things like antibiotics and pesticides, we are essentially doing a disservice to the bugs that live within us. Things like excess alcohol as well, urban environments can affect our microbial health. But even things like lack of sleep and not spending enough time in nature can all have an impact on the bugs that live within us. And why that's so crucial is that really they're like a fingerprint. They are so unique, and they have a lot more of a determinant of our inner health than we could ever have previously imagined. And so it's hard to really quantify what kind of damage we're doing with the day-to-day interactions that we're having with the various environmental things that we're doing. So, as I say, city living, the water supply, the kinds of foods that we're taking in, the stresses that we experience, all of these things, the circadian rhythm, the day-night rhythm of our gut bugs, all of these things have a real impact, not only on the gut itself, but on the rest of our body through our immune system and through our mental health as well. So first tip, I think, would be a simple thing that you may not have even thought of before, and that is to just simply limit the amount of antibiotics that you are exposed to. Now, most of us know that doctors are trying to limit the amount of antibiotics that we prescribe for our patients. And I'm not saying that antibiotics haven't been useful. For many things, they've been incredibly useful for improving lifespan to a certain degree, but the overuse of antibiotics is in essence really decimating our microbiomes and really kind of exacerbating the sort of battle mentality that we have around the natural environment. So limiting antibiotics is probably a number one thing if and where we can. We can also do that through limiting our exposure to things like processed meats and the animal agriculture industry. I don't know what it's like in the US, but in the UK, we use a lot of antibiotics in agriculture. Most of the antibiotics are used when we are farming, factory farming pigs and cows, for example. And of course, we're ingesting a small amount of those antibiotics every time we eat those food products. So that's something to really think about. I'm pretty sure that in the US, not only are antibiotics used for preventing infections in cattle, but also potentially increasing their growth as well. That doesn't happen in the UK, but it would increase the amount of antibiotics that you're exposed to exponentially. Something else is just thinking about things like, as I said, alcohol. Alcohol strips our microbiome. You know, in years gone by, we used alcohol to sterilize surgical equipment. So just think about what you're doing inside the body when you're having a lot of alcohol. And that's something that's fairly simple to look at and at least understand, how much am I drinking and is this really healthy for me? Other simple tips: don't eat too late. You know, our gut bugs have a circadian rhythm just like we do, and so they function much better if you're eating your largest meal earlier in the day. Sleeping well is also really important. Again, I could go through a series of practical tips on how to help your sleep. I could probably talk for an hour on that, but I'll rein that one in. But just to say, think about your sleep patterns, try to make them regular, so that you're helping your gut bugs out just as much as you're helping you. Things like emulsifiers as well. I mean, many people haven't really heard about emulsifiers, but they're actually really common in processed foods. And names like polysorbate 80 and what other ones can I think of?
Carrageenan would be a good one.
Yeah, carrageenan and carboxymethyl cellulose. Now, these are complicated names and you wouldn't necessarily know them, but if you look at the ingredients in a lot of the processed foods that you've got in the supermarkets or the stores, what you'll find is that they've got these secret ingredients and they're not great for your gut bugs either. Cleaning as well, thinking about cleaning your body, cleaning your home. If you've got a lot of bleach or harsh chemicals that you're using, or even, dare I say it, antimicrobials, what you're doing is you're stripping your skin of beneficial microbes, which can also potentially disrupt your acid mantle of your skin and lead you to be more prone to things like eczema and other skin conditions as well. And think about prebiotics. Now, I love plant-based nutrition. I could talk about that all day as well, but you've heard a lot, I imagine, about probiotics. You may have seen ads on the TV to take probiotics, but actually prebiotics are even more important because they are the fuel for your gut bugs, basically. They're the foods that will allow your bugs to thrive and be healthy and give you that healthy internal ecology. So what are prebiotics? Well, essentially it's dietary fiber in various forms. And where do you get dietary fiber from? You get them from fruits and from vegetables and from whole grains and from pulses. So what you're really aiming to do is to maximize those foods as much as you can, both to fuel yourself and fuel your gut bugs. And the incredible thing that happens is that when you're eating these foods, some of them will obviously be partially digested in the small intestine, but most of the fiber that we eat goes right down to the large intestine. It doesn't get processed by us at all, but it does get enjoyed by our internal friends, our gut bugs, and they can create these incredible short chain fatty acids, which allow our immune system to be nice and calm. They allow us to process these incredible nutrients in a much more calm and regulated fashion. It reduces our risk of things like diabetes as well. It's an incredibly useful tool that many of us have never even heard of, and all of that through simple means of plant-based foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes, or lentils, beans, chickpeas, things like that. And specific prebiotic foods that are great for your gut bugs would be things like garlic and leeks and oats. They've got beta glucan, which is also great for your gut bugs. Lentils, chickpeas, bananas, beans, they're all packed with these prebiotics, and they're going to be great fuel to help your internal friends to create a fantastic ecology inside you, so that you can then create health and abundance on the outside as well.
Amazing, beautiful. Thank you, Gemma. I think you touched on so many great pieces there, and the concept of prebiotics as kind of a diversification foundation is really exciting. And one of the nutrients that I think has been completely missed from the whole nutrition world has been that of fiber. And so when you start to think about prebiotics, it's fun to imagine this fiber as this matrix, much like a coral reef would be for its diversity. The fiber allows for this diverse ecosystem of bacteria to find different niches within the food as digestion is happening. There's such an interesting mix of kind of texture and architecture to the very thin lining of material that is on the surface of the small intestine, particularly during digestion. And fiber creates a more depth to that matrix, and a more biodiverse setting there. Gemma, you're touching on this critical subject of kind of beyond the nutrients to the medicines within the food, the anti-inflammatories, the antioxidants, and all of that. And for a deeper dive on that, I'm excited to introduce Colin Huda on here with us. Colin is a phenomenal influencer, I think, in this space of nutrition, as his books, Wild Fermentation, really took a hold of all of us a couple years ago, in seeing the opportunity to liberate from that diverse plant-based diet that you're speaking on, Gemma, into this opportunity for the nutrients to be delivered in a completely different fashion through this fermentation process. So Colin, take us through your journey into fermentation, what got you there, and how your passion has really reshaped your identity around nutrition.
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Colin Hudon. So I practice traditional Chinese medicine and spent a good part of the last 15 years traveling extensively and living in various parts of Asia and studying traditional Chinese medicine. So I practice acupuncture and clinical herbalism. And I've had a particular passion and interest in tea, and in particular fermented tea. So I refer to it as the best kept secret of Asia, or a drinkable antique, because as pu'er tea ages through the fermentation process, it becomes a complex mix of microbial activity, but through the fermentation, it becomes very concentrated in polyphenols and antioxidants, and has health benefits like lowering blood pressure and anti-cancer, et cetera, et cetera. So I currently own a tea house where I teach traditional tea ceremony and also share food, fermented foods, medicinal mushrooms, superfoods, and then we wild harvest a lot of foods in the mountains where I live. And we share all of this through classes and through the food and tea offering, and also the methods of preparing these teas properly. So all of that comes out of an interest that I've had for maybe 20 years in food from the past, from before the modern agricultural system took control of farming techniques and food production methods. And, before corporations and advertisers started promoting addictive flavors and packaging. And, I'm interested in a time when we had a very complex and varied diet. So that's going all the way back to the agricultural revolution, 12,000 years ago, when we had a much different relationship to nature. Because prior to a time when we had farmers and herders making up the primary work that people did, when we would have been more hunters and gatherers, we were interested in the growth cycles of plants, migration routes, and seasonal awareness. And that was fundamentally necessary in order for us to survive. So Chinese medicine is really very old. And the first kind of ancient treatise that we have on diet and on medicine in general is the Yellow Emperor's Classic of Medicine. And so some people will claim that it goes back to 2700 BC. In all likelihood, it's probably closer to 300 BC. But what we have here is a fully elaborated philosophy of diet. And the idea is that by eating seasonally, we align ourselves with nature. And in aligning ourselves with nature, we are provided with the foods that will help balance the body. And so going into a full exegesis on TCM diet probably exceeds the scope of this talk today. But the basic understanding is that we have foods that are warming, cooling, drying, and lubricating. And so the Chinese medical approach to diet is based on an energetic level and less on the biochemical nature of foods. That's more in the purview of biomedical science, nutritional science, Western medicine. In Chinese medicine, we're interested in foods that will treat conditions in the body of deficiency or excess of cold and heat, or we could say hypocirculation and inflammation, deep internal conditions in the body, or more external and superficial conditions in the body. And so what we're really interested in doing is finding foods that grow in specific seasons and help align us to those seasons. So my kind of emphasis is working with patients is choosing local seasonal foods that connect us to the region and the climate that we live in, and also to the farmers who are living closer to the land. I think a deep exploration of Chinese medicine would benefit everybody, but at a simple everyday level, we can try to look by shopping at farmers markets and getting to know our local farmers, what foods are growing locally and seasonally, and then trying to incorporate those more readily into our diets.
Amazing. Can you give us a glimpse of the fermentation process itself? Like what is the goal of fermentation, or what are you achieving with fermentation? How are you changing the food itself?
Honestly, I think there are probably other people on this panel who will speak to that in far better depth than I will, to be honest.
No,
I'm gonna leave it at that, if you don't mind.
all right, sounds good. Yeah. So the seasonality is interesting in regards to the locations of peoples historically, and the idea here that we can start to develop refrigeration and global supply chains to disrupt that seasonal eating started really in earnest in the 1950s, when suddenly we could start to eat avocados year round or whatever it is, and so this phenomenon has been creeping in to homogenize that seasonal experience for all of us across it. But then so there's seasonality problems with the current food chain, but then there's also this regionality that I find so intriguing. So in the same way that you're describing the Chinese medicine and finding these four elements of the cooling, the heating, the drying, and the lubricating, it mimics very much nearly the same time frame, the last 3,000 years of Ayurvedic practices coming out of India. And then you look into Native American cultures here in the United States with First Nation peoples bringing forth food systems very similarly. And now I've been steeped in the Polynesian kind of food system thought in the last year, really kind of diving into what's happened to the Polynesians as they've switched to a Western diet, and how come they are so radically affected, just as we see very much so the Hispanic population or the African population. So anybody kind of south of that kind of northern climate, where you start to get into the tropics, seem to be much more severely affected by the Western food system than our, the northern hemisphere. And I think a lot of that has to do with this regionality and genetic, long thousands of years of development in these more tropical environments that led to these different understandings on how to do food pairing and the rest. And so I'm intrigued that we've lost seasonality, we've lost the capacity for kind of this intelligent dialogue back and forth. But as we think about seasonality, I want to turn over to Dr. Mindy Pelce. Dr. Pelce, you go ahead and introduce yourself too, because you have such an extraordinary career in women's health and nutrition. But I would like you to take us from that concept of seasonality down into the monthly cycle for women and how nutrition can really impact that space.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to say this is amazing to be a part of such incredible brilliance. And I thank you for having this discussion, because I love, there was something you said when you were promoting this about how we need to think beyond the macro, we need to think beyond the nutrient, like we need to take nutrition and elevate it to a whole nother level. So I'm just honored to be here. My background is, my education is as a chiropractor, and I have been in the trenches, as I say, with really stressed out, busy families, teaching them nutrition for 25 years. And I think we have gotten really off track with our thoughts around nutrition. We are talking the wrong topics. And I discovered this not only in my own life, but I've discovered it in my patients and now in our online community. And one of the things that we've gotten off track with is especially around women, and we are not teaching women how to eat according to her hormones. And the best way I can explain this is in my own self-discovery. When I turned 40, I was your typical person who was eating organic, and I think at that time I might have been into the paleo eating style. And pretty soon I was at the best level of health in my life, and pretty soon into my early 40s, that lifestyle stopped working for me. And about that time, fasting was coming on the scene, the ketogenic diet was coming on the scene. And so I started to dive into those concepts and apply them to my life. And like many women, I got great results temporarily. And what I soon learned, the more I fasted, the more I took carbohydrates out of my diet, the more my hormones got off track. And things like hair started falling out, and I wasn't sleeping well, and anxiety came up. And when I dove into understanding nutrition for a woman, I started to see that there needed to be a match to a woman's nutritional needed to match her hormones. And I am still to this day baffled why we don't talk about this enough. So just like Colin was talking about the seasons, women need to think about their cycle and how we should be matching our food to the hormonal needs that we have. And now we've got a large group of people we lead through fasting, we lead through the ketogenic diet, but we teach them what we call feast famine cycling, where there are moments that you are appropriate to go into restriction in your cycle, and there are moments where you need to feast and eat foods that will raise your hormones up. And the best way I can describe this is for a woman with a typical 28-day cycle. You have to remember that at about day 21, your body needs progesterone. And the foods that supply and build progesterone in your body are not ketogenic foods. They are carbs. They are beans and squashes and potatoes and wild rices. And yes, some things like grass-fed meat and seeds and nuts. And I don't understand why we were never taught this. Like, I learned this at 45 when my cycle was about to end. I should have learned this at 13 when my cycle had begun. And what I am seeing as this massive deficit in the world of women's health is that we have to look at the different periods in our cycle and understand when to lean into different foods. So day 21, we need to lead into more progesterone building foods. And those are the ones that I just mentioned. Day 12, we get a surge of estrogen. This is a time, if you talk about gut bacteria, this is a time like we need to be feeding our whole estrobolome, which is a whole system of bacteria in our gut that are made to be able to allow a woman to even break estrogen down into something that's very usable for her body. So at day 12, she needs to be eating more foods that will feed the estrobolome. So more of the leafy greens, more of the prebiotics that Gemma talked about, and more of the probiotic foods, more of the sauerkrauts. There are these pivotal moments in our cycle that if we are not aware, we will literally eat to deplete our hormones. And my big aha in my own journey and with my resetters that we have now hundreds of thousands of people that we fast together and we eat in different ways is that women just aren't taught this. And it's a really big gapping hole in our education and what we need to be focused on. The other point that I really want to point out is around the fasting movement. And I know fasting is quite popular right now. I know this is a concept on nutrition, but I think it's worth really pointing out that fasting needs to be cycled for a woman, eating needs to be cycled for a woman, and every woman needs to find her pattern with it. We need to back out of the one size fits all, and every woman needs to find that rhythm for herself and needs to match her fasting lifestyle and her eating lifestyle to her hormonal profile, and needs to look at this through a hormonal lens. And this is the conversation I'm trying to bring to my community and really bring to light, so that we can start to bring women's health back and look at this, look at food as nourishing to these hormones, just like things like fasting is nourishing to the hormones as well.
Your day 21 diet is very similar to what we use for postmenopausal diets in our clinic. Has that been your experience as well, that the heavy root vegetables and the legumes and such like that can be helpful in that approach?
Yeah, here's the challenge for menopausal women is that, like, what we got away with in 30 and 20, we can't get away in 40, 50, 60. Because at 40, our hormones are doing a crazy decline. And what I also has baffled me is I wish I could tap every 40-year-old woman on the shoulder and be like, hey, I just want to let you know, over the next 10 to 15 years, all those hormones that showed up so beautifully for you are not going to really show up so great anymore. So you're going to need to change the lifestyle, change the way that you're eating to match this declining profile. So for women who are in menopause, progesterone, boy, do we miss progesterone. I wish I had honored progesterone more when I was 30, but at 51, I'm like, oh, I miss progesterone. So yes, day 21, you need to be leaning into the legumes, the squashes, the potatoes, all different kinds of potatoes. And there's some great research showing that the purple potato is, as you know, is going to feed different bacteria than the white potato or the sweet potato. So our variety and diversity of food needs to expand, along with foods that are going to help raise our progesterone levels, because we don't have a lot of room for air, and we need as much progesterone as we possibly can get.
I want to focus in just on the endocrine side, which I usually try to avoid altogether, but this is such a pertinent topic right now, in that at menopause, you continue to make these hormone substrates, estrogen, progesterone substrates, but from the adrenal glands rather than the ovaries.
Yeah.
And I want you to think about that as women that are on right now. Think about your adrenal glands starting to be loved as much as you've been aware and cared for your ovaries. You need to start being aware and care for your adrenal glands. In the same way that you had tolerated stress levels in your 30s that you're not going to tolerate at 50, is actually by design. It's because your adrenal glands, when forced to overproduce your stress response system, is going to downregulate its pro-growth environment of estrogen, progesterone, which is produced primarily through estrone, which is the downside product of estradiol, which we produce from your ovary anyways. But estrone, produced by the adrenals, is such an interesting growth factor. But the body is very smart. It knows that when it's stressed, it should stop making growth factors, because that's a setup for cancer. And so it will downregulate your endocrine axis in your postmenopausal state in reaction to stress in a way that you would not have detected. Would have still happened, but you wouldn't have detected in the same way during your fertile ovarian functional years. And so menopause is very specifically designed to help increase the longevity of women. And so it's a very important transition in life. It's not a pathology. It's not a disease process, but it can feel like one if you don't know how to support the body. So Mindy, thank you so much for what you do for women across the world to kind of bring attention to this. But I also want you guys to all kind of start to zoom in on the possibility that the question just came up on bioidentical hormones. I'm a huge antagonist to the bioidentical hormone concept. I understand that sometimes it's an important crutch. It can help women through challenging moments. But you want to know that that's a crutch. It's not a solution. It's not how your body was designed to produce these hormones or interact with these hormones. Putting growth factors on a stressed out body, again, is a setup for cancer. And so don't take an exogenous growth factor if you're stressed out. So where are your stress levels? Where are your stress factors? Zoom in on that, reduce those, eat to support the adrenals and their production of those postmenopausal hormones that you are lacking. And I think you said such a poignant thing, Mindy, there around, we don't have much room for error at 55 as we did when we were at 35. And I think where the concept of error, where are we going wrong? I think it's largely around stress management. Yep. And so you've raised the kids, you've supported the family, you've done all that, you are the queen now. You need that level of support. You need that level of care and systematic effort to support these systems. Brilliant work. Thank you for that. We'll get back to you in the Q&A, I'm sure.
You.
Gemma, I
Thank
think you
you.
want to jump in.
I do want to jump in. You could see me. I just want to say, Mindy, I really loved your comments, and Zach, I loved how you brought that together as well, because I totally agree. I think that we should really try to reframe menopause as an opportunity. Being menopausal doesn't make you old. It marks the beginning of a new possibility with your life. You're not looking after toddlers anymore. You've got a lot more good things in store for yourself, and looking after your nutrition at this age is really important. And as Zach touched on, stress is poorly tolerated at this time for those reasons, but also thinking about ways in which your food can really help your menopausal symptoms. We know that having excess hormones in our food is not necessarily great for the hormonal fluctuations that we might be experiencing around the menopause. And equally, we look at other cultures around the world. We know that in Japan, they don't really even have a word for menopausal flushing or symptoms, because it's not something that women there generally seem to report. They have diets that are much higher in things like tofu, tempeh, edamame, miso. And these foods are fantastic because they offer you incredible phytoestrogens, adenosine, which is important selective estrogen receptor modulator. So what you're doing there is you're not getting estrogens. Like men, you don't have to worry about having those healthy, minimally processed soy products, because they're not going to give you man boobs. In fact, what they're actually going to do is help you to regulate your hormonal control a little bit better. You've got different types of estrogen receptor in the bodies. You've got the alpha, beta, and the SERMs, the selective estrogen receptor modulators in these foods like edamame and miso. They will selectively bind to those beta estrogen receptors, giving you stronger bones throughout menopause. They will generally be less receptive to the receptors on the breast and the womb, thereby reducing those risks of things like breast cancer and endometrial cancer as we get older. So as a sort of top tip, something practical to take away, it may be that you could benefit from those kinds of foods as well as your fiber-rich foods that we touched on earlier, because as you know, you don't want to be recycling too much estrogen throughout the body, and becoming constipated as well in middle age is not a good idea, because then your body is recycling that excess estrogen that that you're having sort of throughout the life. Really, you want to be able to make sure that your bowel motions are nice and regular. So again, that's where fiber-rich foods come right back into the equation that Mindy was referring to as well. Those whole grains and legumes and fruits and vegetables. And there was a very quick question earlier around people that are not able to tolerate these foods. I think obviously, this is not bespoke medical advice, so you may have to seek out your own nutritionist or dietitian. But as a general rule, I like to think about gut health as being something that we work on gradually. Just as you wouldn't go to the gym and try and lift that heaviest weight and pull a tendon, you don't want to be just having loads and loads and loads and loads of fiber without having gradually increased the levels, so that you can build up the strength of your gut lining and your gut bugs gradually over time and improve those populations in a healthy way. So that was all I wanted to say about that.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And that was a great transition that you just set me up for with going to the weight room. Thank you for that. Alex Guerrero, we are set up for you now. Take us into the weight room, because this is one of the most controversial places, again, where nutrition seems to get off the rails, because how can you possibly say calories aren't important when you're trying to build massive amounts of lean muscle and perform at some extreme level in that weight room or on the court or on the field? And so, Alex, give us a little bit of your background, help people understand just how far you've come in your career to have such a huge impact on some of the most well-known athletes we know.
Thank you. I really appreciate the invitation coming on. This has been so inspiring as I've listened to these two amazing women, and you, Zach. I think I do a great job, right, of eating, whole foods and plant-based, but really what I'm listening to is so inspirational. And so I thank you all for your guidance and your knowledge and your expertise, and for inspiring so many people to do so much better. I started my career. I got my master's degree in traditional Chinese medicine, and I always had a passion for sports. I loved to play sports. My father played professional sports in Argentina. Came here to this country And I was born here. And so sports has always been a big part of our family. And so I love sports. I didn't, grow up with a lot of size, played all through youth sports, and I gravitated towards tennis. So I love the game of tennis. And we see a lot of elite tennis players today. But basketball and football and soccer and boxing and all of these sports that people gravitate to. And I like to say that there's an athlete in all of us. And so these concepts and principles that you're talking about today with nutrition and biome really impacts elite athletes the same way it impacts, weekend warriors or everyday people. And I say that we're all athletes because everybody wakes up and moves every day. And so the idea of being athletic is movement, right? Getting up, and whether you're, lifting boxes at home or moving in and out of the car, or getting up and out of a chair, like those are all athletic movements in my opinion. So I think that the idea of nutrition is very critical. And in sports, as you mentioned, it's dealing with elite athletes is a little bit more of a challenge in some ways, especially when you deal with athletes from a variety of sports, because they're educated through high school and college and things that, calories in, calories out, I need so many calories when they come in. I need this many calories to maintain my mass and my size. And so there's an education process that comes with more the concept of what you eat, how you feel about what you're eating. Those are all really important conversations that we have in our facilities with our clients. And once they gravitate towards the idea of becoming a little more plant-based, they understand its ability in helping them sustain their peak performance, and helping them see that they are not losing power loads. They aren't losing mass and size. They're able to keep their weight up. We've got, a client who's 6'7", 265 pounds, who's mostly plant-based, and he's able to maintain his muscle mass, and he's able to maintain his strength, by the way that he eats. And I think to Colin's point, seasonal eating, eating to nurture microbiome that aids in, helping metabolize and break down lactic acid. So it aids in your recovery. The sleep things we've talked about, all of those things are really critical for those that are not just elite athletes, but even people who want to go out and perform on the weekends and be able to wake up and go to work on a Monday morning and not have, soreness or any type of injury.
So what is your approach for managing your NFL players that you're working with, who are trying to maintain that linebacker weight? What are you using? What are the specific tools that you're making sure that they're getting the energetic input?
Yeah, a lot of it basically is for us. It's very individualized, right? Because people break down nutrients differently. So it's very specific to each athlete. For example, I could have, 3 offensive linemen who need to maintain, 300, 325 pounds, but yet their nutrient intake is different. So it's very specific and unique to each athlete that we see. And I think in order to maintain their sports longevity, in professional athletics, people think that once you reach, age, 30, you're starting to get, long in the tooth in your sport. Certainly 35, 38, 40 is almost unheard of. And certainly going into your mid 40s, like people just don't think about playing professional sports. And as we take our clients from age 30 and start to educate them into this way of living and eating, again, to what, I think we try to help them source things or locally, like Colin was saying, you go to your farmers markets, and we provide them with, because we have clients that come from all over the world to come see us. So it's being able to guide them through where they're able to find the most nutrient dense foods inside the areas that they live in. And even climates and those things are a big contributing factor to how we guide them.
Awesome. And I'm intrigued by, Mindy, your work there around those root vegetables and, getting into, Gemma, your comments on estrogen and progesterone containing phytoestrogen foods and the athlete here, Alex. I'm wondering if you've seen data or you're utilizing your clinic, some of those tools for the elite athlete, eating towards hormonal support.
Yeah, we actually do. Certainly adrenal output is massive for elite athletes. So to support that whole endocrine function is critical. And we're also looking to try to maintain and regulate insulin levels, right, to keep their inflammation rates down. So those foods are so important and super important in the way that we formulate programs for each individual client.
So those are going to be heavy on things like the sweet potatoes, the root vegetables in general, the squashes, the things that we've already outlined there, legumes, the nuts, seeds. Is that pretty much the major categories you're working in?
Yes. And even, making those, nut seeds into sauces, so that they can use those as opposed to other type of condiments, milks, all of that, so that they can, get the energy that they need from the nutrients that they're taking in to perform at the highest level.
I love it. Game Changers has been such an effective film, I think, to kind of bringing attention to just how impactful a plant-based diet can be in these elite athletes around the world, and watching somebody like an Arnold Schwarzenegger had such a different effect than watching nerdy doctors talk about the importance of plant-based diets. And so I think it's intriguing to see as we continue to accelerate the understanding of the importance of everything else beyond the calorie again, or the protein macronutrient concept. There's a question that came through here around, I think it was, 6'4", 210 pounds, 55-year-old male. I get anemic every time I stop eating meat. How do I get my iron? There are so many mysterious magical qualities to the plant-based diet that you just don't expect, but the highest bioavailable iron source in the nutritional world happens to be the most unexpected one for me, which is romaine lettuce, which I literally thought was useless back in the day. If you'd ask me about romaine, I'd be like, what the hell are you doing there? Eat dandelion greens or eat some kale. But it turns out that romaine lettuce has like 40 times more bioavailable iron than does something like kale or your beef. And so just a really potent iron source there in romaine. And so as you dive in, to the plant-based world, you find out that the reason why any animal would have any high level of any nutrient, whether it be B12 or anything else, is because of their interaction of their microbiome with a nutritional input. And so when you take the plant-based diet of a cow, the cows are, by the way, 1,400 pounds of lean muscle and are entirely plant-based in their diet. They have huge amounts of B12, which obviously don't exist in the grass. So where the hell is the B12 coming from? It's made by their microbiome as it's fermented through the process of the rumen gut. And so for the human, it turns out we are very good at producing B12 with a healthy microbiome. But as Gemma pointed out earlier, you don't get a healthy microbiome overnight. And so if you're used to a high antibiotic, high Western diet processed food environment, I can guarantee you're walking around with a tenth of the ideal microbiome diversity and workforce. And so you're going to have to make transitions, and it's going to take some time. It took me about 3 years going hardcore instantaneous plant-based back almost 12 years ago now. It took me 3 years to start to feel like I was getting everything I needed, but I just had this high conviction level, and I like suffering, I think, on some weird psychopathic level. But the 3 years of suffering that I went through there was the learning curve for my body. And I was always excited to feel crummy suddenly, because then it led me on a whole new journey into exploring my own body. This body is, for each of you, I want you guys to know that you have 70 trillion cells that are all quantum computers that are counting it as an analytic machine every second. What is working, what's not working, what's the adaptation that's needed. And so trust your bodies and explore your ideal. And so at any age, at any physical level of output and everything else, you guys need to start trusting your bodies. And so that's what we do in our Intrinsic Health series, 8 weeks of helping you trust your body. because all healing comes from within. And so I think each of us have found our route towards, this nutritional pathway out of our desire for optimization, whether it be for, the avoidance of chronic disease with Dr. Newman, or the avoidance of menopausal and menstrual cycle instability with Dr. Pels, or your work here with athletes. But an area of performance that has quickly risen to become the most important element within our concept of nutrition is the brain. Never before have we seen so much torture on the neurologic system as we have in the last 10, 20 years. The rates at which we've seen Alzheimer's and Parkinson's going up in females and males respectively, the rate at which we've seen attention deficit and autism accelerating in children, the rate at which we've seen the neurodegenerative conditions of MS and ALS in 20, 30, 40-year-olds accelerating. All of these took off at the same time. So we are so excited to have Peter Cummings back with us. Dr. Cummings, triple board certified neuropathologist, with us, and he was with us last month when we covered sleep. Many of you fell in love with him there and are following his work actively. He's as enthusiastic as they come. And Peter, I want to turn to you. Feel welcome to give a few minutes of your perspective on how you and your neuropathology came to care about nutrition and athletics. You've worked extensively with Alex, and thank you for bringing Alex to us with his expertise. But give us a little introduction and then dive into, for a few minutes, your perspective on the gut-brain axis when it comes to nutrition.
Sure. And I'm really glad, Zach, that you kept talking there for a minute, because when you said nerdy doctor, I thought that was when you were going to do your segue to me. So thank you for sparing me that. I also say, usually you throw me on first, and I get so sucked into what you're saying that I have to switch gears really quick. But it's worse to go last, because now I've heard everybody. And I got to switch gears now. I'm absorbing all this incredible information from everyone. I just am so pleased to be a part of this and to have the privilege to listen and interact with all of you. And I'm very, very grateful for this opportunity. And I've always said, if I'm the smartest person in the room, I'm in the wrong room. And I'm obviously in the right room today with all of you. And I appreciate that. My journey kind of started about mid-career, where a lot of physicians have mid-career crises. And being a forensic pathologist and a neuropathologist, I've done thousands and thousands of autopsies, and what I was seeing was this incredible trend of unnecessary death. People, everything that came to the medical examiner's office was essentially preventable death. It was overdoses, homicides, which is a whole socioeconomic issue, suicides, which is a mental health issue, overdoses. And one thing that really struck me was I was constantly, almost daily, putting complications of morbid obesity on a death certificate. And I was seeing hundreds of people every year in their 30s and 40s dying of heart attacks, which is way too young. So I started to realize, as I was somewhat of an active athletic person, that the food we eat isn't just making us feel bad, it's literally killing us. And at that point in my life, I had what I called, profound life frustration, or PLF, because I felt like I wasn't doing anything. I felt like I was trapped outside of a house fire watching it burn down. And I think each of us will admit to some degree of going into our medical careers the desire to help people, and I wasn't helping anybody. And it was about this time that I was working on a book about concussions in youth sports. And I heard about some incredible things that were happening down at the TB12 Center with Alex in treating concussions. Because part of the book wasn't just dispelling some myths, it was giving people empowering information to get better. And the days of putting someone in a dark room for a concussion are long over. So we wanted to give people actionable information. So I heard about these incredible things happening with Alex. And so we reached out to Alex and wanted to learn more about what they were doing. And I just became amazed by what the TB12 method was doing, not just for concussions, but for health in general. And like Alice was saying, I wanted to be, my career as an athlete didn't pan out, so I thought a better way to do that was to do sports medicine. And I intended to do orthopedic surgery in sports medicine when I began medical school. but I obviously took a different path. So it became sort of with the concussions and seeing this incredible amounts of death, and my love for sports sort of propelled me on this journey to change my approach to the planet. And as I was working through this, my PLF, I realized that, you know, medicine has it backwards. You know, we spend so much time focusing on getting sick people better and so little time focusing on keeping healthy people well. And, you know, how many classes have we actually had on health and wellness in medical school? You know, 0. I joke Alex about this, but I've learned more about the human body from him and through my journey through this process here than I ever did in medical school. And now I'm living a great life where I'm certified in specialization training in functional movement, youth sports training, sports-specific training, exercise endocrinology. All of this was trying to improve my performance of people I know, people I care about, young athletes particularly, helping them make better choices. Because with medicine, we're left with 3 really frustrating things. You can do surgery, pharmaceuticals, and reassurance. And there's a better way. And for me, the end result of this process was the discovery that lifestyle is medicine. And that's how I want to approach health as a physician, as somebody who got into this to help people rather than count fatality numbers, which is not very helpful. A couple things I want to go into with the gut-brain axis, but there's so many great points brought up here. And the idea of calorie in, calorie out, or eat less and move more is such a oversimplistic way to approach what a calorie is. And we're over-focused and hyper-focused on calorie. For example, you know, burning 500 calories on your treadmill versus burning 500 calories at HIIT versus 500 calories in the weight room are going to be non-equivalent. Even though they're isocaloric, the knockoff effects are going to be very different. The same thing as if you know, calorie in, calorie out, where all calories are not created equal because you have things like nutrient density, thermo effects of food. All of these things are going to change the way that the energy system moves in the body and the way the energy is transferred from the food you eat through that mitochondria, which exactly touched on is the intimate relationship that we have with the microbes in our environment. Mitochondria came from bacteria. And you think even further than that, a lot of the genes that push nutrition and digest food and allow neurotransmitters to be made, and allow body functions in your liver, heart, and lungs to happen, and a lot of those genes come from viruses. So, you know, so we are a whole bunch of microorganisms moving around here thinking we're extra special and we can just destroy our environment and not have any effect on it, where the health of our planet has a direct impact on the health of our bodies. And I think that's a really important thing for people to think about. In terms of the gut-brain axis, it's we learned about systems in isolation. We learned about the heart, cardiovascular system, the liver, the brain, the nervous system. But in reality, the body is a holistic machine. Nothing happens in isolation. Change something in the heart, you change something in the liver, change something in the brain, change something in the gut. Everything is interconnected, and the body can't function without that communication amongst its systems. With the gut and the brain, it's a two-way street, and there is I like to go all the way up to the top and think about this idea of the cranial nerves, which are 12 nerves that innervate your face. But what they are is they are the survival nerves. They are the things that allow you to, I call them the 4 F's of life: feeding, fighting, flight, and mating. That's what the cranial nerves do. And if you think about emotion, they also provide our emotion. I can smile, I can look angry. All of that is the result of my cranial nerves. And when you hear the idea that if you smile, you feel better, right? Because those muscles are connected with emotions, and the emotions affect the way those muscles work. The interesting thing is that one of the biggest cranial nerves, called the vagus nerve, goes directly from your brainstem all the way down to your gut, and it's a direct physical anatomic connection to the gastrointestinal system. And it's a two-way street. And the way that it really kind of works, if you think about the emotional response we have to food. And eating is a very intimate thing. It's an emotional thing. It's a proximity thing. It's a close thing. We do it with families. We do it with friends. There's a huge emotional component to when we eat and what we eat. And we've kind of thrown that out in our disposable society of drive-through and microwave dinners. But that comes from that access from the brain to the gut. And if I am stressed out and I'm anxious, my vagus nerve tone decreases, my sympathetic emergency nerves ramp up. And that disturbs a whole bunch of things. It disturbs the permeability of the gut. It disturbs the ability for the microbes to live within an environment that is free of cytotoxic chemicals like free radicals, inflammatory cytokines. So that stress has a big effect on those microbiomes. The microbiomes are really important because they produce a lot of things that keep us happy. Serotonin, which is our calming neurotransmitter, most of that comes from the GIT. We communicate with neuroendocrine cells from the gut. We produce neurotransmitters I just talked about, like serotonin. Another thing that's important from the gut is short chain fatty acids, which is a huge component of having your brain function work. So it's a very, very, very complex relationship. And when you want to talk about, Zach, energizing the brain and having your brain work at its peak performance, whether you're a teacher or a lawyer or a doctor or a mechanic, whatever your job is, you want to be great at it, your brain has to be able to function. And a lot of how we've learned about dysfunction or how the brain functions is through studying dysfunction. And one of the things we've learned is that with every single neuropathology condition, whether it's a concussion, Alzheimer's disease, dementia, Parkinson's disease, epilepsy, there's an energy imbalance within the cells in the brain. And this happens because you have the neuron, which is, like my hand, and you have this little support cell, like my other hand, it's called the astrocyte. And we used to think that the astrocytes were these really boring little cells that just created our blood-brain barrier, but they are the nurse cell for the neuron. And they happen to be the glycogen store in our brain. So your neuron doesn't really use glucose. What happens is the way that the neuron gets energized is that the glycogen is broken down and created into lactate. Lactate's then shuttled into the neuron, and it's the lactate that's powering the neuron. I used to think that glucose was the fuel, the preferential fuel of the neuron, but the brain is the ultimate, the human body is the ultimate recycling plant. There are no metabolic waste products that are not used for something unless they're in excess and they cause damage. So when you're working out and you produce a lot of lactic acid because your ATP is being depleted faster than you can make it, we have a way in our bodies where that lactate actually gets sucked up into the brain, and the brain will actually use that to fuel itself. It's a really eloquent system. And so when you have dysfunction in the brain, that relationship between the astrocytes and the neurons and that ability to properly energize the neuron through those connections is lost. And it's a very delicate balance between excitation and inhibition. And if you tip it one way or another, you get a lot of bad things happen, particularly inflammation, those really negative things that happen with glucose metabolism. And, for example, with concussion, we know that if we give somebody a glucose drink, because you hit in the head with a Gatorade, it's one of the worst things you can do because that sugar is going to be turned into free radicals and pro-inflammatory cytokines because the glucose metabolism is completely screwed up. So there's a very deep and intimate connection that we're just touching on right now in the brain. I always joke that the best part of being a neuroscientist is that the most honest answer is I don't know. And the great research is coming out now that's really even questioning how the neuron metabolizes sugar. It's actually lactate. How that connection between my stress and my gut microbiome is so really important for maintaining the health of my microbiome, and how the health of my microbiome in my gut is so important for maintaining my brain health. So that's sort of, my quick and dirty on that. So with that, I'll stop and maybe we'll get some discussion here.
Thank you. I love that. The interesting, interplay. I love your two-way street analysis there because, or analog, everything that goes upstream to the brain is coming back down to affect that microbiome and vice versa. And I find that fascinating. the fat, salt, sugar combinations that got put into the Western diet in the 1950s, in the post-World War II era, where we started to develop the whole concept of fast food, they really did focus groups to look at human behavior of eating. And what they didn't know that they had done was to uncover a dopamine effect. And what they were doing with fat, salt, sugar combinations was forcing the brain to respond as it would with cocaine or another one of those strong dopamine infusion agents. And so you walk out, a kid with a Happy Meal, you're going to have a PET scan in a few minutes that looks like you just did cocaine in regards to the dopamine dump in the brain. At the same moment, the processed food containing the antibiotics and all of the processed chemicals and everything else is destroying the microbiome. And fascinating, neurochemistry happening there is around very specific species of bacteria now being recognized to have to be present on the surface of the neuroendocrine cells that produce the serotonin and dopamine that Pete was just talking about. And so you get this vicious cycle where the food is inducing a dopamine response, but there is no dopamine left after a period of time, which means you need to eat more of the food. So now you're going after more fat, salt, sugar combination to get the same neurologic response that you did to your first Happy Meal. Now you're eating 3 cheeseburgers to get that same dopamine stimulation, to get that pathway going. And so it's interesting that we just have this slippery slope of behavior for the last few decades into a higher and higher dependence to try to get a little bit more surge of pleasure out of our food when we have diminishing returns at the gut-brain axis there. So love that detail that you
and Zach, that is such a great point. It's something you and I have joked about too. And in the middle of my move, with the stress, the chocolate chip cookies were doing me in, and it was that same idea that I knew the chocolate chip cookie, and I get the dopamine effect. I feel really good for a little bit. Then I get, the knock-on effects of the sugar crash, the dopamine levels drop, and I go get another cookie. And it's incredible to see that cycle happen in people. And one way I like to analogy it is thinking about we're not that far off from our dogs. When we train our dogs, we do it reward-based, usually the treat. And it's the same kind of thing where I'm looking for positive reinforcement. And if I'm feeling bad about a circumstance or myself or something, that positive reinforcement from that quick dopamine hit is incredibly reinforcing, which is why addiction is such a very difficult thing to treat.
Beautiful. Love it. I want to open up some of these questions coming in. There's been a lot of questions around the concerns around plant-based diets, around things like oxalates and lectins and things like this that have gotten a lot of flashback in books that have been written by some of my peers and all of that recently, saying that, plants are actually bad for you. Gemma, how do you tackle that subject as we start to look at a plant-based diet and these concerns around these single micronutrients?
Yeah, I mean, more broadly, what I just want to say is that the phytonutrients are, so when people talk about anti-nutrients, they're really talking about phytonutrients, which can be tremendously useful and synergistic with other compounds in plants and in the microbiome. And yes, sometimes they can reduce the absorption of some minerals, but with a varied diet, this is not detrimental. And in the case of things like non-heme iron, it can actually be helpful for the body to be able to regulate the iron absorption, to reduce oxidation within the body, for example. So if you're taking in a lot of heme iron from animal products, your body doesn't really have a way of controlling that intake, and it can easily oxidate within the body. So like, for example, if you're eating an apple, you'll start to notice sometimes you've got the little brown effect after a while once the air's got to it. That's oxidation. Or similarly on a car, if a car's getting rusty, that's really the oxidation that's happening on the surface of the car. That happens inside the body as well. When we have excess heme iron, it's linked to excess risk of things like cancer. So sometimes if you've got too much of something, it's a little bit like a Trojan horse. It comes in, and some of the benefits that you're getting can actually be outweighed by the harms. So I guess to kind of summarize, I'd say when people talk about anti-nutrients, they're not really looking at the synergistic whole of what the body is doing and what the body needs. And what you tend to find is that these phytonutrients are actually really important and working together in ways that we don't always even understand yet to provide us with maximal nutrients over time. Some minerals may be affected by certain things, like, for example, potentially oxalates in foods. They could potentially reduce the amount of calcium that we absorb, for example. But there's actually a couple of studies to refute that effect. And it's a little bit like the example with iron, in the sense that your body is actually able to more easily regulate those foods. So as long as you're having a very varied diet and you've got a healthy microbiome, you should be able to get all of the vitamins and minerals and nutrients you need, probably in excess on a whole foods plant-based approach, because you're going to be having a lot more of the folate, a lot more of the magnesium, and as I say, a lot more of those other micronutrients that you need. So yeah, that's sort of a basic answer. Again, it's quite difficult to give very specific advice, because some people may have very unique situations where perhaps they're struggling with their gut health, with their microbiome, and they may need more specific advice on how to get extra sources of zinc, for example, how to get extra sources of iodine, and those things we could perhaps, you know, address separately. But yeah, that's the basic answer.
Alex, how about that elite athlete that is looking for, you know, some of these nutrients and all that? How do you teach them?
You know, we always tell all of our clients, it's line upon line, precept upon precept, and, you know, here a little, there a little, and, you know, we try to get them to make changes over a, you know, 2-week period of time. I always tell people you can do anything for 14 days, and through that 14-day period of time, what we have learned is that, you know, to what you know, Pete was talking about, like, you develop these new neural pathways of behavior. And I think as you start to feel better, you want to continue to do better. And so it's getting them to go from point A to point B and B to C. So even if you can start with just getting some good, wholesome food at your store, like, go there and start there, and let that guide you and into the next step. Like, okay, let me go see if I can go to, you know, farmer's market and start buying at farmer's market, and those types of things. And then, you know, tapping into experts like this to be able to understand a little bit more about how your body functions. Like, what is the value of microbiome? How important is it to me? What are things that I should be spending my time on? Like, when we talk to our clients, we say, you have so much energy in a given day for so many things. Like, you need to decide what you want to spend some of that energy on. And for me and educating our clients, it's take some valuable time to educate yourself on what you can do to sustain your peak performance, however you define that for yourself. And so that's why I think that, you know, starting small is better than not starting at all. And then continue to as your body gets more nourished, and as you gain more, I don't know, more unity with yourself, and you understand yourself better, with what you're taking in, and you're connecting better on a cellular level with what you're taking in, I think you yourself will begin to drive you to be even better than what you are. Does that make sense?
I love that. Yeah, it's a training program. You're really learning there, and I want to jump in with you, Mindy, on, you know, that transition into menopause and all that, and then Pete will bump back to you as well.
Yeah, I really resonate with what Pete was saying too, is that not only are those foods creating this dopamine response, but they're also raising insulin. And anytime insulin's going up over and over and over again, your sex hormones are going to go out of balance. So I saw in the chat, there was a lot of questions about, well, I'm postmenopausal. Well, I personally, the number one hormone that it doesn't matter if you are menopausal or postmenopausal, you've got to get insulin under control. And the minute you get insulin under control, now we have a door in. And the door in, now you can lean into these progesterone building foods. You can lean into the foods that feed the estrobolome, but you gotta manage insulin. And the majority of the world is not managing insulin. And so we're left with this really severe imbalance in sex hormones in both men and women. But unfortunately, it's the menopausal woman who's suffering the most. Personally, I mean, I guess this is my world that I'm living in, but we see so many postmenopausal women that still have menopausal symptoms because they've never been taught how to manage insulin. So you can throw a bunch of progesterone building foods, and that's not going to do the trick until you manage insulin. And you're living in a world that has you addicted to foods that are not only raising dopamine, but they're raising insulin. So, and I love what Alex said, like, you just got to slowly step out of that. And once you start to get a little glimmer of how good it feels to be in a more stable a world where you're not so addicted to these foods, now you're motivated. Now you're in.
Beautiful. A lot of Pete, you had a comment there, and then
And I just want to piggyback on what Mindy just said too, because that was brilliant. And Alex touched on something really briefly, but it's really important. That people make decisions based on fear. We've seen that the last how many months we've been locked in at home. People make decisions based on fear. And a lot of that fear is not wanting to lose something, which is why game shows work. And what's behind door, I can give you this $500, or you want to see what's behind door number 2. Now I'm taking $500. So when you start talking about improving the diversity of your gut microbiome and changing the way you eat and the way you approach food, one of the traditional steps is to have a fitness coach or professional come to you and say, okay, write down every single thing that goes into your mouth this week. And then we're going to sit down and we're going to go through it. And what they do is they take a red pen and they scratch out all the things that say don't eat that, without thinking about the emotional need for that. A great example I saw one time is someone who was eating lunch at McDonald's every single day in the parking lot of McDonald's. Well, why are you doing that? Why do you do that every day? Because my job sucks. I can't change my job. It's the only chance I get to get out of the office. And I just, again, dopamine, I feel good when I eat my Happy Meal. Okay, well, how about instead of cutting that out completely, why don't we try Subway a couple of days a week? Why don't we try something else? And so what you do is you slowly start to integrate other things, high quality nutrients into that diet. You start to say, well, you're gonna have the Big Mac, but you can get a salad with it too. Do that. And then what's gonna happen is they're gonna start to feel better. And then they're gonna be afraid of losing how good they feel. And that's the transformation you want to have, and I think Alex was talking about, have them make, walk them to it, and have them do that, empower them to do that for themselves. It won't work, which is why diets fail, which is why a lot of these fad things don't work. And what Mindy was saying is really interesting. And insulin, these foods raise insulin too, but it's not necessarily the insulin itself that's causing the problem. Insulin's a marker for a whole bunch of other stuff that's going on. We did this really cool study when I was in grad school, where I took a bunch of my friends who were really healthy young people at the time, and we gave them a glucose challenge drink, which is like chugging a 2-liter bottle of Coke. And you can watch how their blood vessels react with the ultrasound. And we found that when they drank the glucose drink, their what's called endothelial function, the ability of their arteries to dilate and constrict, was altered and was pathological. And when we gave them antioxidant vitamins, like vitamin E, it was protective. And so the idea that the insulin's going up is a marker for a whole bunch of other bad things that are going on, particularly oxidative stress. And that oxidative stress is setting off this inflammatory reaction that's then altering hormone responses, altering receptors, altering everything downstream of that. And it's a great point that Mindy makes, that it's a really great point.
Awesome. Gemma, you raised your hand there, and Colin, I'm coming at you next with a different question around rebuilding the microbiome, and we'll get to that. But Gemma, why don't you finish us out on this topic?
I'd love to. I just wanted to touch back on 2 things briefly. The first was around sports nutrition and your comments at the very beginning of this panel, where looking at calories is a very simplistic way of understanding nutrition. And I spoke with an elite sports nutritionist. In fact, I did an Instagram live with him just a couple of days ago, which is saved on my profile. And he shared that unless you are a bodybuilder that's competing, on a sort of a competition-based level, calorie counting and carb restriction and carb loading and the bulking and the shredding, all of this kind of carb and protein ratio kind of counting and weighing your food and all this stuff is just not necessary. And I really wanted to just get that in there, because I think a lot of people who are wanting to get into movement, wanting to get into sports, they can feel a bit overwhelmed. They can think, well, I don't know how to do this in the way that I'm supposed to build muscle. I don't know how to do this in a way that I'm supposed to, so that I can eat in abundance without feeling as though I'm eating too much. Like, what do I do? I think my main point there is to try and keep it really simple. You can watch the Instagram live if you're interested, because he goes into all of this, and it seems almost controversial to say it, because all over social media you get people saying, you know, you need to count this particular carb, count this particular protein amount, and that's how you're going to build muscle, and that's how you're going to build strength. But actually, if you try and keep it really simple, it's a lot easier, and you don't need to get into that kind of a mindset, because that can then potentially lead you to restricted eating and potentially sort of disorders with your relationship with food. So that's just a very brief thing I wanted to talk about in terms of sports nutrition, but also just bringing it right back to what Pete said around why people make decisions around food. And he talked about fear as being a great motivator, and you know, that really resonated with me, because you know, we all know that food is about so much more than nutrition, and you know, it's an expression of identity. It's a way to, you know, bring people together. It's a form of celebrating milestones and memories. It provides us with comfort. You know, you were saying earlier, who reaches for a plate of steamed broccoli when they're feeling low? You know, people don't tend to do that, you know. So I guess what I would like to sort of bring this round to is really helping the people who are listening on this panel to think about food as a form of self-love. So rather than thinking about it as something that motivates you through fear, think about it as a celebration of yourself, celebration of your body, a form of care and compassion as well for yourself, and also for the world around you. So I just wanted to kind of end on that point for me, because yeah, bringing it back to love is always a good place to be.
I love it. Thank you. Colin, give us a glimpse of 4,000 years of Chinese medicine and nutrition. The microbiome was not specifically talked to in that diet, but how do you see that interplay between that traditional diet and, you know, the hots and the colds and all of that with the rebuilding of the microbiome through fermentation?
I think that's a great question, and I'm going to circle around to that. Talking about in terms of women needing a diet specific to age, and I'll relate that to the question. In my studies of traditional diet and traditional cultures prior to the development of the modern agricultural system and the reduction to, you know, simple staple crops, you know, wheat, corn, potatoes, etc., I became really interested in centenarian diets and the centenarian populations around the world that have thrived and have populations that consistently have people living over 100 years old. So we have the Hunza in Pakistan and Ecuador. And when we look at the work of people like Walter Longo, Dr. Mao Xingyi, who's one of my teachers in Chinese medicine, Dan Buhner's work with the Blue Zones, they're looking at these traditional cultures and trying to understand what consistent patterns are we seeing in these diets that are lending themselves to extraordinary longevity. A lot of the principles that we're finding, we also see all the way back in that ancient treatise I was talking about, the Yellow Emperor's Classic of Chinese Medicine, which goes back well into BC, you know, 300 to 2500 BC is when that text originated. We're seeing these dietary decisions that are supporting a healthy gut biome, and they were making those decisions probably based on an emotional feeling, not on obviously studying the biochemical factors of diet. So we look at primarily plant-based diets with a lot of nuts and fish. In Chinese medicine, we specifically in terms of nuts for longevity, we look at black sesame seeds, walnuts, and pumpkin seeds, which nourish the kidneys. Going back to what Mindy was saying, eating foods that support our longevity, or Zach, like you were talking about, foods for the adrenals. We see foods that support your adrenal system in traditional wisdom, in traditional Chinese medicine, for foods that support the kidneys and adrenals, because the kidneys and adrenals are related to the filtration systems in the body, to the water element, which is the winter time. So when we're eating foods that are in the winter, that are warming to the kidneys, foods that are the color black, that nourish and support the adrenals, and we eat these foods on regular cycles through each season, then we start to see that we're nourishing the microbiome and the immune system. 80% of the immune system resides in the lining of the gut, and your microbiome's in constant contact with it. So again, I'm kind of coming back around to trying to study what are the traditional foods that we ate before the modern agricultural system, and then what of those foods lend themselves to extraordinary longevity. And then as we see in Dan Buhner's work, great longevity goes hand in hand with with happiness and love, like Dr. Gemma was saying. So the macro kind of cosmic view of it is, how can we live in greater connection to the local ecology and recognize that humans are nature, we're not somehow separate from it.
That is a beautiful conclusion point. I am loath to wrap this conversation up because I feel like we could go on, and each of us on the panel would get more and more out of it with every hour that went by, as well as the audience that's begging us not to stop here. But in respect to everybody's time, I do want to wrap up, but let's take a few minutes to go ahead and just get some closing thoughts, because that was a dynamite closing thought from you on that front, with that kind of emotional connection back to food again and community. Mindy, what do you got there? Closing thoughts after hearing this conversation?
Yeah, I want people to go back to follow. I love what Gemma said, like, go back to falling in love with your body, go back to falling in love with what nature has provided us for nourishment. And let's get out of this rigidity that we need to be eating one specific way. Like, I don't understand why, as a culture, we love to say, I'm keto, I'm paleo, I'm vegan. Like, how about you just find your diet and you find what nourishes you, and you fall in love with this incredible body that you have been given. And that's what I hear in a common thread that everybody is saying, is that let's go back to this inner work that is going to give us outer peace.
Beautiful, beautiful. Pete, final comments there.
No, I don't. This is great. Like I said, we have a very intimate relationship with our food, and that is generated again through our brains and our cranial nerves and what we see and how that makes us react and feel. And the biggest thing, I think, especially the holidays coming, give yourself a break. And there's so much distraction out there, and we've talked about the fact that the Instagram models, everybody working out without shirts on, is giving people a lot of pressure to look a certain way, to feel a certain way, and give yourself a break. And love your food, love cooking the food, love eating the food with the people that you're with, and appreciate each other.
Beautiful. Thank you. Alex, jumping in there.
Yeah, thank you. I think Gemma said it perfectly. It all resolves around probably the highest vibrating frequency there is, and that's love. And finding what's harmonious within inside yourself. I always tell all of our clients, if all you ever do is all you've ever done, then all you'll ever get is all you've ever got. And so really, have the courage to just dig a little deeper, find that inner fortitude that's in all of us, to just care about ourselves just a little bit more, and that will drive you to make one better choice today than you made yesterday.
Beautiful. Gemma, what do you got there? Everybody's referred to your final comments already, but you got any other closers?
Taking it all in, enjoying the talk about love, and I'm a big fan of love, obviously.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
I think basically we have to sort of understand that nutrition is a huge topic. There's a lot of emotion that goes into it. There's a lot of fear that goes into it. There's a lot of tribal kind of arguments that go into it, but just got to bring it back to really nourishing yourself and nourishing the people that you love, bringing healthy food to the table for your loved ones, and creating memories around food that you're going to enjoy and that will last for a lifetime.
Oh, I love it. Thank you, each of you. There's a thought that came up while you guys were all closing your comments there. I was at this amazing little event that was in Northern Virginia about a year ago that invited a couple over from Icaria, Greece, which is one of the blue zones that Colin was just speaking on. And on this little island in the Greek Isles, the majority of the population will live past 95, many of them over 100. Not an unusual thing to see them over 105. And so in this incredible longevity environment, they flew over and it was a nutrition conference that I was keynoting. And so this couple prepared a meal for us the night before. And so I showed up, and honestly, I was actually pretty grumpy because I was like, oh, there's only 60 people coming to this thing. And like, I don't want to, I was just so busy. I just felt like I was wasting my time. And I showed up in a grumpy fashion and then sat down, and the woman from Greece starts to talk about the onion that she's about to serve us as our first course. And this onion contained more love and history in it than anything I'd ever heard prepared. And it was literally an onion that had been roasted. And it was one of the most delicious things I'd ever put in my mouth. And then it unfolded into like this, 6-7 course meal. And every ingredient took that kind of love and passion in it. And I was just so blown away by the whole experience. And at the end, I got up and I toasted with something that I thought was brilliant around the microbiome and nutrients. And we are biophotonic creatures. And that sounded so typical Zach, brilliant. And the gentleman stands up from Icaria and he says, thank you, Doc, but you're completely wrong. Which is always like one of those moments where you get goosebumps when somebody just flat out says, you're just wrong. I just said like 10 really cool things and I'm just flat out wrong across all of them. And he says, what you're missing is that the reason we live long in Icaria has absolutely nothing to do with the food. In fact, it has to do with the way in which we consume it. We always set one extra chair at the table, hoping that somebody will come unexpectedly to the dinner table to eat with us. And we never ask each other in the morning, what did you eat last night? But we always ask, who did you eat with last night? And that's what makes us live long, is being connected to new people and new faces and new fellowship and across multiple generations. And so in this era of fear and isolation, I would encourage all of you to think about your nutrition, not in the context of its micronutrients or macronutrients, or its fiber or non-fiber, its probiotic or prebiotic. Who are you sharing it with? Are you in fellowship? Are you in love with the world around you? Are you taking the opportunity to fall in love with a new human being and walk for a moment in their moccasins, as you sit and listen to their life journey at the dinner table? Food ultimately was its most powerful source when we saw it as a focus for fellowship, a focus for human connection. And so I would encourage all of you, as you continue to be blown away by everything you've learned here, to shake off the fear that you have, shake off every story you've heard of terrifying micronutrients or phytonutrients or estrogens, and shake all of that off. It's not the right story. It's nouveau science. It's everybody trying to sell a book. It's all of this. The reality is food was created for a source of life, and life would only be useful and even pertinent to pursue if it was in communion with others. And so get connected, be connected to everybody around you. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, I want you to acknowledge everybody in the audience who supported this, which is through the global education effort. The Global Education Initiative is something that we put into play just a few months back, and we're raising money through the GoFundMe site to support bringing more and more production around this. It takes quite a bit of effort, a huge team to produce on this quality of effort and to keep the communication going and to bring the kind of excellence you are. So jump on and support the Global Health Education Initiative. We believe that this kind of information needs to sit out in the public domain, not behind firewalls and paywalls and the rest. And we're eager to continue to bring more and more quality impact to the world. So thank you for all the support that goes into that. And just so blessed to have everybody on the panel. Thank you guys each for being present with us. Thank you for your expertise and your passion for humanity. Each of you have had such an impact on me already. And I'm excited to see the trickle-down effect as the 7,500 people signed up for this thing consume this information over the next couple of days. I hope that the information nourishes them just as much as the food will. Thank you all so much for being with us. And I can't wait for the next conversations.